So good morning, everyone. It is 11 o'clock, so we want to be respectful of people's time, and we're going to get started right away. I am Helen Weber with HW&Co, and this is our agenda, and then we were going to start with Terry Troy from Community Leader.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Terry Troy, Executive Editor of Community Leader. Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, today's webinar, where we take a deep dive into the issues driving and sustaining nonprofits. This is the latest in a series of webinars presented by HW&Co, Business Volunteers Unlimited, and Community Leader. It's also a companion piece to a story that was published in the November issue of Community Leader. In that story, we reveal the results of a survey of Northeast Ohio nonprofits, including their thoughts and concerns on a wide variety of topics, such as budgeting, strategic planning, understanding the board and its role, donor engagement, fundraising, funding gaps, and strategic partnerships and alliances. Our preliminary survey results painted an interesting picture of the nonprofit community here in Northeast Ohio. First of all, the segment looks fairly healthy, at least according to the respondents. 59% see revenues increasing, while only 14% expect revenues to fall. The downside is that 82% expect the services they offer to increase, with only 2% expecting a decline. At the same time, respondents recognized increasing competition for resources in the community, which seem to get smaller and smaller by year. Areas for concern for local nonprofits include funding gaps, donor engagement, and fundraising, but only about a third of respondents were only mildly concerned with those subjects. Strangely, IT and cybersecurity, two topics top of mind for many industry and business segments, were not that concerning at all to nonprofits. People working at nonprofits are fairly happy with the performance of their boards, with 72% indicating that boards fully understand their role in the organization. Contrasting that, 55% have faith that their board will offer an appropriate response to emerging market forces, with slightly more, 57%, believing their board effectively fills its roles. Our survey also revealed that almost 20% of nonprofits don't have a strategic plan, but 52% of respondents revealed that if they don't do something strategically different in the coming year, they won't survive the next 3 to 5 years. Of our respondents, 79% indicate that their organizations have considered strategic alliances, and we'll offer a little more on that later. Many nonprofits are interested in reaching a broader segment of the population and want to increase their visibility in our market. Other areas of concern include recruitment and retention of volunteers, offering competitive wages, and making sure the overall work environment is non-toxic, all issues that can be resolved through proper strategic planning. Today, we'll address the importance of budgeting in daily operations with the need to be more flexible in long-term planning. That includes getting everyone involved in the budgeting process, not just the finance department. That includes all who are responsible for bringing in the dollars, as well as spending the dollars to accomplish the nonprofit's mission. We'll also talk about strategic planning and how it can leverage a nonprofit's resources, such as volunteers or donor dollars. This includes an understanding of how the board and management work together to achieve a mission, as well as establishing long-term goals. Strategic planning should also include consideration of long-term trends within the organization, as well as external trends and future events that could possibly impact future operations. Finally, we'll also talk about strategic alliances, an emerging trend in the nonprofit industry, including how such alliances can be used to address the shrinking availability of funds, volunteer willingness, costs of operation, and overall mission support. This includes considering the benefits as well as potential problems and pitfalls of any strategic alliance partnership. We'll also talk about implementation of strategic partnerships and how to begin the whole process. So we do have a pretty full hour for you. We also hope that your organization can use information to support its long-term goals and planning, or perhaps foster some new ideas that can help you succeed.
So budgeting. So I think the first question is why budgets matter, because you don't have to do a budget. There's no laws, there's no rules. It's not like a tax return where there's a requirement to budget. And in the financial world, I think that throws us a little bit because we have lots of rules. Not only do we know what we have to do, but we get some how-tos with it. And I think that, creates, a level of, complexity and some confusion when it comes to budgeting, especially if you've never had to do it before. And, really what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give you the framework, the walls and the roof, to do a budget, but then you're going to go ahead and make it your own. And the reason that it matters is because it's good, business sense, even though you're a nonprofit. I say you're in the business of something. And when you do a budget, it's just another tool in the toolbox. When you budget, you're planning for your sustainability. It also gives you the ability to monitor your organization's progress as you go through a year and as you go from year to year. And the first step really is, I think there's three. You plan, you do some planning, you actually create the budget, and then afterwards it's looking at the results. They say plan, and then execute. I think the first thing you need to do is set a timeline. You set a due date for all the deliverables. You maybe are providing to everybody that's going to be involved in the process, the prior year budget, the prior year to date, actual to budget results. So you can kind of see, like what did we think and how did things shake out? And I think you also need to, like, when you set up, those due dates for everybody involved, you need to tactically step it back to when you start this process. So, let's assume that you are a January 1 is the start of the new year, and that's when you're the first of the budgeting year. Before that, you're going to want to upload the budget into your accounting software. But before that can happen, the board needs to approve the budget. And I think, I can easily say, well, you should start 3 months out. And I feel like, I hear a lot of people start, 3 months out. So if you're January 1, start of your year, that would mean October 1st. But you have to consider, how long is this going to take you? And that will be determined by the complexity of your organization, the size of your organization. You may need more than 3 months. You might not need 3 months. But you also have to think about the board, because if your board meets, let's say they meet, quarterly, they meet every other month, starting October 1st may not give you enough runway to get the final document to the board. If they meet November 10th or November 20th, you're really looking at 5 to 6 weeks. And is that really enough time? And I think for most that's no, because they also have to do a whole host of their regular tasks that, come day in, day out, month in, month out. So, just some things to think about, but I think, you for sure probably are looking at a 3-month process. And one of the first things I think you need to do is to develop some assumptions. And those assumptions are what do you want to achieve this year? What's feasible? What's not feasible? What's feasible if we, go over a few hurdles? And when you have those discussions, everybody, all the key people in management, program directors, department heads, whatever you call those roles, they all need to be at the table. And the reason is you're going to get a better budget when they're all sitting down. I always say, it's not a finance only task. It maybe starts in finance when, we develop the templates for the budgeting, and we upload it at the end, and we generally were driving that bus. But in between, there's a whole lot of other people that are not financial. You get a better budget. And I think, when you get into those, the different areas, departments, programs, it instills, some ownership when they help develop that budget. And when they especially when you're looking at the budget, the actual results compared to the budget, and what's happening and not happening. And, all those conversations are going to drive your assumptions. So you just want to make sure too that you've brought all the people into the circle and around the table. I also say consider using a budgeting tool if you don't already have one. If you've done this process for many years, you probably have one. Sometimes your organization changes so much that maybe, we try to kind of fit a circle into a square, and sometimes you just need to strip it down and start over again. But I think, some softwares have something built into them. Oftentimes, you're going to use something you want to use something in Excel. Excel gives you a lot of flexibility. Most softwares, if you're going to upload your budget, you can do that easily, but it's usually from an Excel formatted document. Also in Excel, it's going to give you that flexibility as you work through this process. You can automate. So as you decide, like, well, we think salary raises are going to be this or they're going to be that, you can change that percentage, maybe at the top of the spreadsheet, and it'll just update all the salaries for you. Or if you say we think the healthcare costs are going to update, it'll just manually do it. So you don't have to go in and manually do, or it'll automatically do it for you. So you don't have to manually do that. And I think that's really why you want to use Excel, and then like maximize it to the greatest that you can. If you do not have a template, I'm going to say I have found one that I like, because I think it has a lot of the components that we're going to talk about next when it comes to creating a budget. It's a I don't know, nonprofit think tank consortium. I don't know what they call themselves, but I happened to see it, and you was able for a free download. They have it branded, so I feel like it's okay to share. So I've given it to clients, non-clients. If you're a larger organization, this probably will not be for you, but it's great. There's a few tabs in there, and as I said, it's going to hit all the things that you need. And once again, you're going to take this and customize it to you. So yeah, when it comes to creating a budget, after you've gone through this planning process, you know what you want to achieve as an organization, but now it comes down to quantifying the resources that you're going to need. And this goes down to like bringing all the right people into the circle. You have to ask the right people these questions in order to get the right answer. So when it comes down to it, we're going to evaluate what monies do we need to receive, and what monies are we going to spend. And then, when you ask the right people, you need to be on the monies inside. You're going to be asking development, fundraisers, grant writers, and then on the money spent, it's like, who are the people spending the money? So it's going to be the people in charge of, so because they're going to be approving all the expenses for like the program, for your IT, for your human resources. So it's not just direct in the program, but it's also, some of those supports. Because you know what? The people in charge of programs, they know what the FTEs are needed. They know if there's additional expenses. Like for every person we hire, we need to buy a cell phone, or we need to buy a laptop, or these people are going to have travel expenses. There's things that so that me as a finance person, may not know, going into the budgeting process, what's needed. And the same thing on the support side. HR is going to know what should you do for raises, based on the the current, the job market, I should say. When it comes to filling positions, what kind of salaries you're going to have to offer to get people in the door if it's a competitive market. HR is going to know what that increase in healthcare benefits is going to look like, or they probably have the best guess, because I think sometimes we don't know. But the biggest thing in this area that I think is the dollars in drive the dollars out. So dollars in drive the dollars out. It is not the other way around. And I think there's like two areas where I see like budget failures, and this is number one. The other ones will be coming up. Is that we do the expenses, we say this is what we need to do what we want to do, and then we look at the revenue, and there's a gap. So what do we do? I mean, I think on the revenue side, you should be conservative, but you can still stretch. But what we do is we just put whatever we need to make it work, which is, it's like the worst thing. And I've seen instances, and like one is there was a large USDA grant out there, and the organization thought, well, we kind of align with it, so, and we need to fill a gap, so this is what's going to do it. What happens in April or May? They didn't get the grant, and it was a huge hole that they had to plug. But it was all about plugging that hole. Nobody asked the development person, because the development person would have said it could go either way. And and unfortunately, sometimes some of this is top down, where they, are saying just make it work, and you put the numbers in there, and the development people have to go out and get the dollars. They know what's out there, what's feasible. There might be some great funding available, but until you start having conversations and bring people in to see your organization and what you're doing, that's not going to be, it might not be 2025, but it could be 2026. They know those things. And so that's why I said it's important to ask those people and to, really take to heart what they're telling you. But at the same time, it's okay to stretch, but just don't do pie in the sky, or just don't put something in to kind of, fill that hole, as I like to say. The next, item on the list is, don't forget about a contingency. Like, I absolutely recommend it. Life, we always say life happens. Well, stuff happens. Like the unknown, the unexpected. Contingency generally, if the easy way to do it is just to do, and it's just as good as anything else, a percentage of your expenses. And it could be 1%, 2%, 5%. What does your organization need? What does that number need to look like? But what I would be really clear about is what this is not. This is not like a license to spend. Just because a department has like a 1% of expense contingency, it's not like, oh, I have more money. That's not what this is. This is truly for the unknown and the unexpected. You should not be using it to, as a way to cover expense overtures, which sometimes I think people think I can go over because I have this contingency. That's not what this is. This is really for those things that happen that are unexpected and unknown. For most organizations, the largest expense that you have to quantify is going to be what we call human capital. And I always say, start there. Really button up the FTEs you need, the salaries, the payroll related, your benefits that you're going to need for those. And then you're 80% of the way there. And I feel like that can maybe make this process a little less daunting when you start. I mean, it's a lot of work. Do not get me wrong. I'm not trying to trivialize it, because there's a lot of time to get there, because I think that's easier. What I just said is very quick, but it's actually a longer process. And then, the next step on the expense side, because the expense side has its challenges, I feel like, because it's time consuming, is, you're going to put the expenses into categories. They're going to go into buckets. Are they direct expenses? So you're doing like the hands-on of the mission. Are they support services? So you're enabling, it's something that enables the person providing those direct services. Is it general and administrative? Are they capital costs? And then also don't forget about depreciation. It's not a cash item, but it's something, especially if you have to have financial statements in accordance with accounting standards, that you're going to want to add in there on your statements. But the other, piece to all of that too is, once you get all your expenses into those buckets, on the direct and the support, you're going to want to probably break those out by program. And some are easier. If all I do is program Y, then all my salary and every expenses related to me, you're paying for my cell phone, my mileage, my laptop, all of those things are going to go into that program. It gets a little trickier, especially in support, because sometimes support persons or support expenses are supporting multiple programs. And at that point, and this could happen with direct care, because some people may be doing 2 different services, or going between programs, is you have to figure out to allocate it. And that is perfectly acceptable. You just want to find a method to allocate that is reasonable. There's no, I feel like too, this is the other one on the financial side, we like to have something very specific to point to, but it's like, what does it make sense to do? For the IT, is it, the people that they have to serve? If it's maintenance, do you allocate maintenance costs based on square footage throughout the building? And, if program A is over in this space, or, it's whatever makes sense is what you can do. And it's tied to how expenses are consumed, or how people spent their time spent. That's another, very viable way to allocate your expenses. And that, I think too, that can be daunting, but, I think it's just like you just take it one step at a time, and you think about all the different expenses and how they are consumed, as I said, and then that'll like really help you see the way to how you should allocate it. Next, I think you should budget for, I say it's budgeting for financial success, which means, at the bottom line should be positive. I mean, not negative for sure, not even zero. You should have a surplus, because I'm not talking about hoarding cash, but I'm talking about having a surplus for your organization so that you can be viable. Because when the lean year happens, or like a large unexpected happens, like COVID, it's going to be that surplus that's going to help you, to continue on, and so that you can, do the work that you're doing. The last bullet point here is, to consider a multi-year budget for longer term projects. I think when people hear projects, they think capital, like you're building a building, and absolutely that should be, considered. But there's also, are you going to add a new program? Are you going to contract and not provide certain services, or change how you're changing those? Because those two things also just don't happen overnight. You don't say, oh, we're going to start providing this service, and then everybody shows up to your door on January 1st to get it. There's usually the kind of a ramping up while word gets out, and you hire people. And so, you want to see what that looks like, and how long is it going to get to its, in full capacity mode. And the same thing, if you decide that you're going to pivot away, you're not just going to decide on January 1st, we're not going to do this anymore, and people show up and you're saying, well, sorry, we don't provide those services anymore. That's going to be a gradual process too. And you want to see too, like, how is this affecting you, financially? And when I talk about viability, I talk about financial viability. That's not the only kind. I recognize that. And, so, I mean, I know it's all on one slide, and it makes it sound easy, but as I said, like, this could take you a month to do, to create that budget, and you're circulating around. There's many iterations and versions of the budget going, and you're tweaking it until you get to something that, like, everybody thinks is a really, really good representation of the organization, and it's something that you are prepared to give to a board for approval. Once you have board approval, that's when you're ready to upload the budget. You want to upload a budget, by month into your accounting software. So once you have your annual budget, you want to break it down into 12 months. That's also where I think Excel is a really great place to start your budget, because you can easily do that. The vast majority of your expenses are going to be incurred equally over 12 months. There's some that are going to be cyclical. And so for those, you're not going to be able just to put a formula to divide by 12 and drag it across all the months of the year. You'll have to do some manual, but I feel like the vast majority are. And so once again, that's how Excel will make that process easy. I say you should be running monthly reports, like when you run monthly financial reports, a budget to actual should absolutely be in that list of reports that you're running. You're sharing with management, you are sharing with the board, and you want to look and see, like, are you meeting expectations? And we're talking financially, and you're going to look at the revenues and the expenses. Do we have our revenues far exceeding what we thought they were going to be? Are we going to have monies that we might have to return because we haven't spent them, if there is that stipulation with the dollars that you receive? Expenses, are we not spending dollars? Are we spending too many dollars? And I feel like this is where I'm going to say this is like budget failure number 2 that I see, is that you do have these, you're not meeting, you're either exceeding or underperforming. I don't know what the word is there that I'm looking for, those items. And like the time to course correct, to dig in and find out, do we have an issue? Is it an outlier? Is it a timing issue? Or is there a true problem? And if there is a true problem, like, course correct now. I think sometimes people don't do the work and don't dig in there to see what's going on. And nothing's worse than when you're like a few months out for the year and you find out, we're going to have to pay back monies, or, we might not be able to provide services. It's better, I think, to, plug that leaking boat, the leak in the boat early on and do it sooner versus later than having to get out that life rafting and get on the life raft. So, sooner versus later, I feel like that's with anything in life. And then, just in general, a budget is both, when you do it, it's both forward thinking, because you're thinking about what do we want to achieve, like who we are, what we want to achieve. But also when you get to this point, when you start running through the year, it's also like kind of almost like a reflection of the past. The budget is a plan. It should reflect who you are and what you want to, achieve. And I know it's hard to think this because it takes so much of your time, which is in short supply, but this is an opportunity for you to really think about the organization and think about, really consciously, where is our monies coming from, to be intentionally decide how you're going to spend those dollars. Because, I think, as all financial people probably say, that, these numbers, they tell a tale, and you wanted to tell your story the way that you want it, I guess is what I should say. So if you want that template I mentioned, just email me and I will send it your way. So now I will hand it over to Biz and Ann.
Good morning, everybody. Let me see if I have mouse control yet. There we go. And thank you to Terry and Helen. We're so glad to see everybody here today. So I'm just going to really quickly touch on, based on those survey results, some of the major trends that all of us nonprofits are dealing with. I'm the president and CEO of Business Volunteers Unlimited, which is a nonprofit. But together, we're all seeing these converging trends of increasing demand, which many of you said in the survey results, along with increasing competition for limited resources. And, to the increasing competition, I don't know, our sector is proliferating. Even, during the past few years, it continues to grow. And I don't know, 17,000 nonprofits in Cuyahoga County. I mean, that's just a shocking number. And so, again, as the number of organizations continues to increase, the pies aren't increasing at the same rate. The dollars, the volunteers, the staff who are willing to work for nonprofits. So, again, increasing competition. So the takeaway is, for many of us, we're, every day dealing with really complex strategic and financial pressures. Demand continues to grow. And so it's critical that we have plans in place to determine how are we going to leverage our limited resources and continue to achieve our mission. Strategic alliances is something that we're seeing a lot nationally, certainly, but certainly regionally. We're also hearing a lot about it, and the pressures coming from funders and donors and just the community at large. And so the takeaway for all of us as nonprofits is just understanding that there's this full spectrum of potential strategic alliances. Obviously, many of you know that because 79% said you're involved with strategic alliances, but it doesn't have to mean a merger. It can mean collaborating on a program, sharing space, sharing a staff person. Look at the Destination Cleveland and the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission share one fabulous CEO. Two boards coming together to make that very strategic decision. So strategic alliances are something that we all should be considering. Another trend in our sector is just the increased scrutiny on the sector. Calls for increased accountability and transparency. And my colleague Julie Clark just shudders when she looks at this. 56% of Americans trust nonprofits to do what's right. That's pretty alarming, right? But again, so it's so important that as nonprofit organizations, we have all the policies and practices in place to be completely accountable and transparent, and that we've got the right people on the board with the right skills and expertise who can provide the right oversight and also be strong ambassadors for us. And then finally, funding trends, and this really affects the way that we as staff and board members spend their time. This is just charitable contributions to the nonprofit sector in 23, no government contracts or anything here, $557 billion. And most of it, that big mustard colored piece of the pie, is coming from individuals. And so, again, for most nonprofit organizations that we work with, they're really trying to figure out how can they get more individuals to know about their mission, become supporters, and eventually donors. And your board plays such an important role in this. foundation giving. Many of our foundations are becoming more strategic. So it's that much harder to raise the foundation dollars. And then corporations, we work with lots of businesses at BVU. We're hearing that they're much less likely to do the multiple galas and golf outings, more likely to support organizations where they have an employee on the board, or where they are really strongly mission aligned. So again, just high level trends that illustrate how important it is to really have the right plan in place, the right budgeting in place, and be always thinking about strategic alliances. And so these are the three topics that Ann and I are going to hit on right now. And I think the one key takeaway with all of this that we're talking about today is having a really strong partnership between the board and your chief executive in all of these, that the board plays an important role too. So with strategic planning, and I think talking about it a little bit, and I think 52% of you said, or many of you said that you definitely have plans, but 52% said if you don't do something different in the next few years, you're going to be in a really challenging situation. So a well-crafted plan provides clarity and flexibility. It's not this rigid roadmap that we have to do this, even if things are changing around us. But it really, and we've heard from so many folks that their strategic plan really helped guide them through the pandemic. It helps you understand as needs continue to rise, when do we say yes and when do we say no? And organizations with really good strategic plans and goals and accountability all built in, that really is very attractive to your funders and your donors as well. So when is it right? I mean, do you do it every year but not necessarily? I mean, I think it's iterative. You're always updating your plan, but a new plan, you might, when your plan's about to expire, if you've got a real big challenging issue facing you, maybe you update your strategic plan. If you've got big changes in your business model, what's so important, some organizations that we work with are always in that firefighting mode and they say, we don't have time for a plan, but that's when you really need it, again, to really focus on what is it that we have to do and what are the things that we just can't or don't need to be doing right now. Somebody else can be doing it. And a lot of your funders definitely want to make sure that you've got a good strategic plan. And then how do you get there? And again, I hope that, many of you have them, but I'll just reiterate that having a task force that includes board members and your key staff members working together to come up with the plan is so important. So at BVU, we always work with a task force of board and staff. We always have a facilitator, and we at BVU obviously do a lot of facilitation for others, but making sure that there's somebody who's not part of the process, but's helping to facilitate the process. And similar to what Helen was saying before, for budgeting, same thing. You want to have, when you're embarking on the plan, making sure that what's the outcome? What are we trying to figure out here? And what's it going to look like? Because sometimes you can go through a process and realize this isn't at all what we needed. This is, this is pie in the sky. I think doing research, not just navel gazing, but really getting feedback from your stakeholders is important, and benchmarking and market analysis and competition analysis, looking at your budgets and your pro formas moving forward, all really an important part of having the right strategic plan. And I'm just sharing you, this is the tool that we use at BVU. So for, for any strategic plan, you're going to hopefully look at your mission and your vision and your core values again, and then you're going to have some goals. Each goal is going to have some strategies. The strategies are going to have some tactics. For each of these, you want to identify what are the additional resources required. Is this going to cost us money? Do we need to hire staff? Do we need new CRM? Is this a year 1, year 2, year 3? What's the timing? We can't do it all at once. And who's responsible on the staff and on the board? So who's really responsible to make sure that this happens? Because if you're not assigning accountability, it might not ever happen. And then what are the KPIs, the key performance indicators, or how are we going to measure progress? Is it a check mark because this is just done? Or is this something where we want to grow it by 30% in the end, so it's 10% per year? But having some framework like this that builds in the accountability and the timelines and the who's responsible is really important for an effective strategic planning process. And I'm going to turn it over to Ann now because she's done this and leading an incredible organization and is going to talk a little bit about their process and their cadence and how they use it.
Sure. So just before I get started, I thought it'd be helpful for many of the folks on the phone that were on the video call that don't know about McGregor, but we have been around for almost 150 years. We do all things senior. It's probably the best way that I like to describe us. We support over 1,000 older adults every day with about 535 employees. So we need a strategic plan. It guides a lot of our work, if not all of it. And the way we've chosen to approach this is on a 10-year strategic direction, which just make sure that we're making progress toward that 10-year strategic direction. We break it up into 3-year increments because we are in healthcare, which frankly is changing very quickly. And we have a number of issues that are stressing our organization, from workforce to wages to government reimbursement. And so we need to be flexible in our planning. We use a tool very similar to what Biz mentioned earlier with this tactical planning and making sure that each one of our executive leaders has who's, what's the timeline, who's accountable for it, and we are reviewing that. I am reviewing that every 6 months with the executive committee so that there is clear. We use a green, yellow, red color system just because it's easier for folks just to quickly look at the plan and understand where we might need to do additional work or make some course corrections.
And so then every 3 years, do you start over again, or are you've got this 10-year strategic direction, but is there a new plan embedded within that 10 years every few years?
Every 3 years, there's a new plan with, again, with those KPIs and where we're heading because of the growth changes. And we'll talk a little bit about strategic alliances, why that 3-year timing is important. So yes, we do that.
Yeah. And this kind of goes right into the strong budgeting, forecasting, and risk assessment. And because when you're doing your strategic plan, I mean, until you've got, as we talked about, the KPIs, but also the budget that goes with it, and that sometimes drives the timing. If you don't tie those things all together, it's just it's not really a plan. It's more of a dream, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the budgeting process and risk assessment that you do, and then we'll see if Helen has anything to add here. I'm trying to there you go. There's your slide.
Sure. So I think one thing that's really important as you're doing budgeting, keeping your risk in mind. So we talked earlier about being in healthcare and understanding both the local and national trends that are impacting our nonprofit and the business that we do. We need to do some stress testing, frankly, because when there is significant changes, we can see both the good that comes, maybe growing faster than we anticipated, but then how does that impact both recruiting the team members that we need in order to deliver a service for our older adults? Or on the other side, if we don't have the same revenue impact that we've talked about, or that we had planned for, how are we going to adjust resources to make sure that we can still be financially viable? So I think that's an important part that you'll want to do is on the stress testing side. We have been going through a significant time of inflation over the last 4 or 5 years, which has increased salaries, benefit costs, and the things that maybe we may have planned for in the budget, but maybe change in the middle of the year. So you have to make sure you're taking those issues into account. And then lastly, before you finalize your budget, make sure you're talking with your board about what the risks are. If this doesn't go to plan, what does that mean for your organization? So you're not halfway through the year and having to bring the board along because a plan did not work out the way you had anticipated, and they really didn't understand what the risks could be if it didn't go to plan. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind.
And I think the only thing I would add is that, you should, your budget should be a reflection of your mission, your strategic plan, and you really should probably go like line item by line item and make sure like it does this align with those other pieces. And then, I have a quote and I'm going to read it because I'll never, but like, your approach to budgeting should not be like considered like a routine financial exercise, but as a strategic opportunity to bring your mission to life. And I think like it's a great way to view the budget.
Absolutely. And I know earlier Helen talked about course correcting. And is that something that, do you have an example of how and when you might course correct as you're, looking at your budget for the year? And what is your board looking at? Are they looking at quarterly forecasts against the budget, or how often are they seeing the forecasts?
So our board sees a monthly financial comparison to budget So we look at those monthly. When there are strong variances to budget, then we're explaining the why behind it. And if there's a course correction that we need to do, we highlight those. I do a monthly management letter that goes in front of the financial package to the board, because I think it is helpful when they can understand how the financials fit into our strategic plan, so that we continue to tie back the financial results to the planning process that we have experienced. Probably the biggest one I can point to is, again, in healthcare, nursing salaries shifted dramatically from plan, and we had to do course corrections in the middle of the year in order to recruit and retain our talent. And that was something we could not have planned for, because we didn't, I don't know that anybody anticipated the significant shift in salaries that we experienced.
Yeah. Well, my gosh, I mean, you've been around for 150 years because you've got all these really good practices in place, right?
We'd like to think so.
Yeah. Then the last topic that Ann and I were going to touch on was strategic alliances. And, you know, it's always important for our organizations to be thinking about strategic alliances. How do we increase our impact? How do we reach more people with our mission? How do we stretch our resources and even attract funders? And I've got some examples. Ann's going to share an example of how McGregor has approached strategic alliances, and then I'll just wrap up with some best practices that we're seeing organizations put in place when they consider and pursue strategic alliances.
So as I shared earlier, we are a senior living, senior services organization, and historically had been focused much more on the place-based services. So where people would move to where we were located and be served out of our different facility locations. We've now shifted to community-based services, you know, meeting people where they are. And one of those opportunities we've been advocating for PACE expansion, which stands for Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly, which is a service-based model where you're both the insurer as well as the care provider. And we were excited when the state, so this is part of that planning, right? We were excited the state agreed to expand across 8 counties in Ohio. And there was an RFP process. So we knew we were planning to expand it into Lorain. So we put in a proposal for Lorain County, but knew that we didn't have a presence in Summit County. And one of our partners or collaborators in both the advocacy as well as in a couple of other joint ventures was Ohio Living, who has a facility, a senior living community in the center of Akron. And so we were able to merge, or I will say leverage, the strengths of both organizations. So when you look for a strategic alliance, you know, where do you have synergy with both mission fit as well as service fit, where you can bring your strengths and they can bring their strengths, and you can expand your mission that past what you could do on your own. So I think that's one component when you're thinking about how can you move forward. It's also from a growth perspective and a risk side. Most boards are more comfortable if you're not putting in all the capital for expansion. So where there is partnership and where you can leverage additional resources, that's another factor. On the Hospice of Greater Cleveland, both Judson, which is also a senior living community, as well as McGregor, had individual hospice programs that were fairly small. By bringing those together and creating a new organization, we were able to actually gain economies of scale, expand the programming, and better serve the residents that are living in our communities, but also individuals who may be reaching out to us from the broader community, which previously when we were doing it individually, we could not meet that need. So both of those examples are, I think, leverage the strengths, again, of each organization, as well as having that trusted partnership. We can talk about that more if we have time. Once I want to make sure you get the chance to go through your slides, but why kind of the pre-work that has to happen before you make the jump to either a joint venture or a more formal collaboration. So I'll turn it back over to you.
And talked about how important synergy is and leveraging a good partnership so it's a win-win. You know, in the nonprofit sector, if you're talking about a merger, even if you're different sizes, it's usually treated like a merger. So But the key ingredients, and at BVU, what we do is we help with merger feasibility studies. So before you decide to merge or go into a strategic alliance, you're really looking at some key criteria. But what we've seen is successful is that the leadership, the board and staff leaders, when you're collaborating, really are focusing on the big picture and the missions and not getting into the what's in it for me as much when they're defining what the, I see Ann nodding, and then trust. And, really believing in the integrity of both groups, that they're coming into the table to do what's best for their mission, being inclusive and not having like little secret cabal, little groups meeting on the side, but an open and process, not with everybody, because sometimes this is something that's very confidential, but within the group that's working on it, participation and inclusion, very careful and thoughtful communications. Sometimes strategic alliances can make staff and or clients very nervous. Looking at culture, and we all hear about culture all the time and how important that is, but I've seen strategic alliances that didn't work because the cultures did not align. And then knowing that when you're pursuing a strategic alliance, that you're doing that on top of running an organization at the same time. So really being realistic about what the timing is and being flexible there. And the barriers, again, in our experience, and we've probably worked with about 20 different organizations on feasibility studies, when you see that not work, it's lack of trust. When each organization is really focused more on their autonomy or who's in charge or what's our role or what's in it for me, the self-interest, and then the culture has been those have been the biggest deal breakers in terms of good collaboration. And so the keys when we look at the feasibility before you decide to go into a partnership, first of all, it's mission compatibility. And, they don't have to be aligned. They can be complementary or even a little apart, but that they're compatible and core value compatibility too. The alignment of the programs and the services and the cultural alignment, again, that really speaks to the core values. The financial pro formas and being able to demonstrate that over time that this partnership, whatever it is not going to financially really become a burden on either or both organizations. You want to define in advance who the staff leadership is going to be and make sure that that's palatable for both organizations. And what the governance structure is going to be. Is it both boards coming together if it's a merger, or is it a little few people, or if it's, if it's a collaboration, is there any board oversight for the collaboration? I've got to stop talking with my hands. And then, the org design, again, really looking at that and laying that out. And then the communications, which again, this can oftentimes be a confidential process, but how is the communications coming out? Who are the first tier folks who need to be informed, second tier, staff, funders, donors, community at large, clients. So what's the order and what's the messaging? That's really important. So that's, here, I'll go back. But Ann, I don't know if you wanted to add then to here in terms of the synergies and the partnerships, but these are the things that we've seen to be really important to figure out in advance.
Yeah, I think the only other part I would add is when we talk about focusing on the big picture, it is natural for leaders who maybe historically have been the one that's been comfortable making the decision, or their leadership teams were the only ones making a decision, to then bringing in a partner and spending the time to talk about what does success look like. What are we, how are we going to measure whether this is successful at the end of, when we're fully implemented? What does that look like? So then you can work backwards, because sometimes if you don't spend the time to talk about those things, that's usually what gets you hung up, because you were thinking one thing and the leader from the other organization was thinking something else. So you really need to spend the time, put it on paper so that everybody has a clear picture of what we're working towards. I think that's a great reminder as you're trying to identify what makes where we need to be looking for venture, joint venture opportunities or collaborations, even if it's not going to be a ownership change.
I love that. I'm adding that to our list. That's really important. Thank you. All right. So I don't know. It's Phyllis. I think our time is, I don't know if you had another question, but I was going to ask you quickly, and if there were just any common mistakes that you want to just call out before we part in terms of strategic alliances.
Well, I think the biggest one, and we've talked about this before, is people wait too long. They wait too long till they're in financial stress, and then they don't have the timeline, or I guess the runway, to be able to do some of this work that we've talked about. And then it becomes maybe more of a someone taking over another organization versus really an alignment, a joint venture. So make sure, as you mentioned earlier, there were a number of people that said, if I don't do something differently, the organization might not be sustainable in 3 to 5 years. Don't wait till year 4 to see whether or not that's really going to be an issue. Start that planning now. And if you think that you would be stronger working with another organization, work with BVU, identify potentially where there could be synergies with other nonprofits that you could be working with.
Exactly. Don't wait till you're kind of on that slippery slope of, it's been called like the zone of, when you're heading down the slippery slope, look for partners when you're a strong potential partner.
Right.
And thank you so much for sharing your examples and your expertise. And again, incredible leadership for this important organization in our community. So thank you.
Thank you. That was so much food for thought. I wanted to thank everybody who has participated today. That includes Anne from McGregor, and then especially BVU and Community Leader Magazine for putting together the article, contributing their wisdom for the articles, and not just this one, but the 2 others that were done this year. So I think it took many of us to make what I thought was some quality content that could be useful for the nonprofits. All right, thank you for attending. We always appreciate your time because we know how valuable it is. And I wish everybody a great, fantastic end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you.